moment you feel the need to defend yourself, you've already lost. Not the argument, not the relationship. You've lost something deeper. You've lost your center, and she can feel it before you even realize it's gone. There's a split second right before you open your mouth to explain yourself, right before you justify your actions or prove your point, where everything changes. In that moment, you become smaller. Not because you're wrong, but because you're reacting from a wound you don't even know exists. Every time you defend yourself, you reveal that her opinion has more power over you than your own inner knowing. And this is where most men lose themselves completely. What if I told you that the strongest men throughout history understood something that modern men have forgotten? They knew that true power isn't in having the last word. It's in not needing to speak at all. Let me show you what Carl Jung discovered about the hidden dynamics that control every conversation you've ever had, and how conscious silence can transform not just your relationships, but your entire sense of self. Picture this. Sarah comes home from work, frustrated about her day. Instead of simply venting, she starts nitpicking. Your dishes in the sink, the way you handled the morning routine, something you said 3 days ago that apparently meant something completely different than what you intended. You feel that familiar tightness in your chest. Your logical mind kicks in. She's being unreasonable. I need to explain. I need to set the record straight. So you start talking. You list facts. You provide context. You explain your good intentions. And with every word you watch her get more upset, more emotional, more convinced that you just don't get it. This scene plays out in millions of relationships every single day. And here's what most men don't understand. You're not having an argument about dishes or schedules or forgotten conversations. You're playing out an ancient psychological drama that Jung called projection. She's not really upset about the dishes. She's upset about feeling unseen, unheard, unloved. But instead of sitting with that vulnerable truth, her psyche finds something tangible to blame. And you, in your desperate need to be understood, take the bait every single time. The moment you start defending yourself, you've entered her emotional world on her terms. You've agreed to play a game where logic doesn't matter, where facts are irrelevant, where the only thing that counts is who can make the other person feel worse about themselves. And you will lose this game. Every time. Not because you're weak, but because you're playing with the wrong rules. You're trying to solve an emotional puzzle with logical tools. You're trying to heal a wound with words, when what she actually needs is your unshakable presence. But here's where it gets interesting. Why do you feel compelled to argue back? Why does silence feel impossible in these moments? Jung would tell you that it's because you're split. There are two parts of you in conflict, and until you understand this split, you'll keep getting pulled into these dramas. Part 1 is what Jung called the persona, your mask, your image of being the good guy, the reasonable one, the man who can explain himself and make everything okay. This part desperately needs validation. It needs to be seen as right as justified, as the victim of her unreasonable emotional outburst. Part 2 is your shadow, the part of you that actually resents having to explain yourself at all. The part that's angry about being put in this position. The part that knows deep down that her upset isn't really about you but feels powerless to say so without looking like an uncaring asshole. This is the Carl Jung shadow at work. The disowned parts of yourself that you've pushed into the unconscious because they don't fit your image of who you think you should be. Your persona says, I need to fix this. I need to make her feel better. I need to prove I'm a good man. Your shadow whispers, "This is bullshit. I'm tired of walking on eggshells. Why is it always my job to manage her emotions?" And caught between these two forces, you do the worst possible thing. You argue. You try to defend your persona while suppressing your shadow. You explain and justify and prove all while denying the part of you that's actually angry about being put in this position. She can feel this split. Women are remarkably intuitive about emotional incongruence. When you're saying one thing but feeling another when you're performing care while resenting the performance she knows. And it makes her feel even more unsafe, even more unseen. This is why the arguing escalates. She's not just upset about the original issue anymore. Now, she's upset about your lack of authenticity. She's upset that you're performing concern rather than actually being present with her emotional experience. The solution isn't to become better at arguing. The solution isn't to suppress your shadow even more effectively. The solution is integration, bringing these split parts of yourself into conscious awareness so you can respond from wholeness rather than reactivity. And this integration begins with understanding the most counterintuitive truth Jung ever discovered about human psychology. The moment you stop defending yourself, everything changes. But not in the way you might expect. Most men think that staying silent means becoming a doormat, letting her win, sacrificing their masculinity on the altar of keeping the peace. This is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold space for opposing forces within yourself without being torn apart by them. I'm talking about a silence that comes not from fear or submission, but from such deep self-knowledge that external validation becomes irrelevant. When you truly understand your own worth, when you've done the Carl Jung shadow work to integrate your disowned parts, you no longer need to prove yourself to anyone, including her. Here's what happens when you reach this level of consciousness. She starts her familiar pattern, the accusations, the emotional intensity, the attempts to pull you into reactivity. But instead of taking the bait, you simply witness. You see her pain without making it about you. You hold space for her emotional experience without needing to fix it or defend against it. At first, she might escalate. She's used to your reactions. Your emotional responses give her something to push against, something to blame for her own inner turmoil. When you don't provide that resistance, she's forced to face the real source of her upset, the unhealed wounds within herself. This is the mirror effect. Your calm presence reflects back her emotional chaos in such a stark way that she can no longer project it onto you. She has to own it. And something beautiful happens in this space. Genuine intimacy becomes possible. When you're not defending, she doesn't need to attack. When you're not trying to fix her emotions, she can actually feel them fully and move through them naturally. When you're not making her pain about your inadequacy, she can share her vulnerability without having to armor it in blame. But here's the crucial part. This only works if your silence comes from integration, not suppression. Marcus learned this the hard way. For years, he tried to be the evolved man by simply not responding when his partner got upset. He thought he was being mature, taking the high road. But his silence was actually passive aggression, a way of punishing her for having emotions while maintaining his image as the reasonable one. His partner could feel his resentment. She could sense his superiority, his unspoken belief that she was being too emotional while he was being logical and calm. This made her feel even more abandoned, even more unseen. True conscious silence is different. It comes from a place of genuine compassion for both her and yourself. It comes from understanding that her emotional intensity is not a personal attack, but a cry for connection. It comes from knowing your own worth so deeply that you don't need to defend it. This is what Jung meant when he talked about individuation, becoming who you truly are beyond the masks and roles and reactive patterns. When you reach this level of self-awareness, your very presence becomes healing. You become what Jung called the stable self, a calm center around which others can safely feel their emotions without drowning in them. The paradox is this: the moment you stop needing to be right, you become unshakable. The moment you stop defending your worth, it becomes obvious to everyone around you. The moment you stop trying to control her emotions, she feels safe enough to actually share them with you. This isn't manipulation. This isn't a strategy to win arguments or control women. This is what happens when a man does his psychological work so thoroughly that he no longer needs external validation to know who he is. But let's be clear about something crucial. There's a difference between conscious silence and submissive silence. And if you get this wrong, you'll end up more wounded than when you started. Submissive silence comes from fear. It's the silence of the people pleaser, the man who's so afraid of conflict that he'll endure any emotional abuse rather than risk displeasure. This silence breeds resentment. It's a form of self-abandonment that ultimately destroys both your self-respect and the relationship. You can recognize submissive silence by how it feels in your body: tight, tense, suppressed. Your jaw clenches, your chest constricts, your stomach churns with unspoken words. This silence is actually a form of emotional violence against yourself. Conscious silence feels completely different. It's spacious. It's grounded. It comes from a place of choice rather than fear. Your body remains relaxed because you're not suppressing anything. You're simply choosing not to engage with drama. The key difference is integration. When you've done your Carl Jung shadow work, when you've made friends with the parts of yourself you used to disown, silence becomes the expression of wholeness rather than fragmentation. Let me tell you about David. For years, his relationship was a cycle of arguments, apologies, and temporary peace. Every disagreement became a war of words where nobody won and everybody left, feeling worse about themselves. Then David discovered Jung's work on the shadow. He began to explore the parts of himself he'd been hiding: his anger, his need for respect, his frustration with always being the one expected to apologize first. Instead of judging these parts or acting them out reactively, he learned to acknowledge them consciously. The next time his partner started an argument, something was different. David felt his familiar urge to defend himself, but he also felt something new: choice. He could see the whole dynamic playing out. Her pain looking for a target, his wound wanting validation, the entire dance they'd been doing for years. Instead of entering the dance, he simply said, "I can see you're really upset. I'm going to give you some space to feel whatever you're feeling." And then he did something revolutionary. He left the room. Not in anger, not to punish her, but to honor both her emotional experience and his own need for peace. When he returned an hour later, she was calmer. The storm had passed through her naturally, without needing his resistance to sustain it. For the first time in years, they had a conversation instead of an argument. This is what conscious silence creates: space for authentic emotion instead of reactive drama. Space for genuine intimacy instead of psychological warfare. But the transformation goes deeper than just avoiding arguments. When you master this level of emotional regulation, your entire presence changes. People begin to respect you differently. They sense your groundedness and feel safer around you. They stop trying to pull you into their drama because they can feel that you won't take the bait. This isn't just about romantic relationships. This shifts how you show up at work with your family in every interaction. You become the calm in the storm rather than another wave adding to the chaos. Now I want you to imagine something. Imagine walking through your day with such deep self-knowledge that other people's opinions of you, while you might consider them, don't determine your worth. Imagine being so grounded in who you are that you can witness someone else's emotional intensity without making it about your adequacy as a person. This is what Jung called the individuated man. Not the man who has all the answers, but the man who no longer needs external validation to know his own value. In relationships, this creates what I call gravitational presence. Instead of being pulled into other people's emotional chaos, you become a stabilizing force that others orbit around. They feel your calm, and it reminds them of their own capacity for peace. Think about the leaders, teachers, and mentors who have most impacted your life. Chances are they had this quality. They could remain present with intense emotions, both yours and their own, without being thrown off balance. They didn't need to fix you or change you. Their very presence was healing. This is what becomes possible when you integrate your shadow instead of fighting it. When you acknowledge your need for respect without demanding it. When you honor your boundaries without having to defend them. When you can witness someone else's pain without making it evidence of your failure. Elena noticed the change in her partner before he even told her about his journey into Jung's work. He just stopped needing things from me, she explained. Not in a disconnected way, but in this way that felt so much safer. Like I could be upset without it meaning he was bad. Like I could share my feelings without having to wrap them in accusations to be heard. This is the paradox of conscious silence. The less you need from others, the more they want to give to you. The less you demand validation, the more naturally it flows toward you. The less you need to prove your worth, the more obvious it becomes. But this transformation requires something that most men resist, feeling your feelings fully instead of defending against them. When she's upset, and you feel that familiar urge to fix or defend or explain, you have to be willing to sit with the discomfort of not knowing if you're good enough, loved enough, valued enough. You have to be willing to let her have her emotional experience without making it about you. And you have to be willing to feel your own emotional experience, the hurt, the confusion, the desire for appreciation, without making it her responsibility to fix. This is advanced emotional work. This is what separates boys from men, reactive patterns from conscious choice, ego-driven relationships, from soul-deep connection. When you can hold space for both her emotions and your own, without needing to fix either, you create the conditions for genuine intimacy. When you can remain grounded in your own worth, while witnessing her struggle to find hers, you become part of the solution instead of part of the problem. So here's what I want you to remember. Boys fight to prove their worth. Men rest in the knowledge of it. The silence I'm talking about isn't the silence of defeat or submission. It's the silence of someone who no longer needs external validation to know who they are. It's the silence of integration, when all the parts of yourself are finally working together instead of against each other. Jung said something profound. The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are, But most of us spend our lives defending who we think we should be instead of becoming who we actually are. When you stop defending your image and start embodying your truth, everything changes. Your relationships become deeper. Your presence becomes more powerful. Your silence becomes more influential than other people's words. This is not about controlling or manipulating anyone. This is about taking full responsibility for your own emotional state so that you can show up as a gift rather than a burden in other people's lives. The woman in your life, whether it's your partner, your mother, your daughter, your colleague, doesn't need you to fix her emotions. She needs you to be so grounded in your own worth that you can witness hers without being destabilized by them. She doesn't need you to have all the answers. She needs you to be comfortable with not knowing while still remaining present. She doesn't need you to defend your goodness. She needs you to embody it so naturally that it never occurs to you to prove it. But let me be honest with you about what this journey actually requires. It requires you to face the parts of yourself you've been running from your entire life. The anger you've been suppressing, the needs you've been denying, the resentment you've been carrying, the wounds you've been pretending don't exist. This Carl Jung shadow work isn't comfortable. There will be moments when you feel like you're falling apart, when the old ways of being no longer work, but the new ways haven't solidified yet. There will be relationships that can't survive your transformation, people who preferred you when you were easier to control. But on the other side of this discomfort is something most men never experience: the deep peace that comes from being aligned with who you actually are. The unshakable confidence that comes from knowing your worth is not dependent on anyone else's opinion. The profound relief of no longer needing to perform or prove or defend. This is the journey of individuation that Jung spent his life mapping. It's the path from reactive boy to conscious man, from wounded ego to integrated self, from needing validation to being validation for others. And here's the beautiful truth. When you do this work, you give everyone around you permission to do it too. Your conscious silence becomes an invitation for others to stop performing and start being real. Your integrated presence creates space for authentic relationship instead of unconscious drama. The world needs this from you. Not more arguments, not more defenses, not more men trying to prove their worth through words. The world needs more men who are so grounded in their own value that they can hold space for others to discover theirs. This is the real work. This is the path home to yourself. And it begins the moment you decide that your worth doesn't need to be proven to anyone, including yourself. Your relationships are waiting for this version of you. The version that doesn't need to be right to feel worthy. The version that doesn't need to fix others to feel valuable. The version that can remain present with pain without being destroyed by it. If this resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in these patterns and you're ready to do the deep work of becoming who you really are, then I want you to know this is possible. This transformation is not only possible, it's inevitable once you commit to the path. The moment you stop performing empathy and start embodying it. The moment you stop defending your worth and start living it. The moment you stop trying to fix her emotions and start witnessing them. That's the moment everything changes. That's the moment you become the man you were always meant to be. Not perfect, not without struggles, but integrated, whole, present with both your light and your shadow, comfortable with both your strength and your vulnerability. This is what the world needs from conscious men, and it begins with the courage to remain silent when every part of you wants to speak. to remain grounded when everything around you is chaos, to remain yourself when others are trying to pull you into their drama. Your silence can change everything, but only if it comes from wholeness rather than woundedness. Only if it comes from choice rather than fear. Only if it comes from the deep knowing that you are enough exactly as you are without needing to prove it to anyone. This is your invitation to come home to yourself. This is your invitation to become the calm in the storm, the peace in the chaos, the presence that heals simply by being fully itself. The journey begins now. The journey begins with you.